Most people misunderstand how emotional connection actually develops. They assume it is created through big actions, carefully planned conversations, impressive expressions, or moments that are clearly marked as important. But in reality, connection rarely forms in dramatic peaks. It is built in the quiet in-between moments that most people overlook. It starts with something small, a question asked without pressure, a pause in conversation that feels slightly longer than usual, a change in tone that isn't dramatic enough to demand attention, but noticeable enough to carry meaning. These are the moments where emotional connection is either strengthened or weakened, often without either person realizing it at the time. The human mind is naturally drawn to obvious signals. We notice strong emotions, clear statements, and visible actions. But emotional reality doesn't always operate in obvious ways. Much of it exists in subtle shifts, slight changes in attention, engagement, and responsiveness. These shifts are easy to miss because they don't announce themselves. They don't demand interpretation. They simply exist, waiting to be either acknowledged or ignored. When someone reaches out emotionally in a subtle way, they are not always seeking a direct answer. Sometimes they are seeking presence. They want to feel that the other person is mentally and emotionally there with them in that moment. Not distracted, not half engaged, fully present. And when that presence is returned, even in a small way, it creates a sense of closeness that is difficult to replicate through words alone. But when those small moments are missed repeatedly, something changes. Not immediately, and not dramatically, but gradually. The emotional rhythm between two people begins to weaken. The natural flow of interaction becomes slightly more mechanical, less responsive, less connected. And over time, this creates distance that neither person may consciously notice until it becomes significant. This is why subtle moments matter more than they appear to. They are not insignificant simply because they are small. In fact, their smallness is what makes them powerful. They occur without pressure, without expectation, and without performance, which means the response to them reveals something real about presence and awareness. Emotional connection, in its most authentic form, is not built through effort alone. It is built through attention, through the ability to notice when something small carries meaning and respond in a way that acknowledges it. Not perfectly, not dramatically, just honestly. Because in the end, it is not the big gestures that hold relationships together. It is the accumulation of small moments where two people felt seen, even briefly, in the middle of ordinary conversation. Human communication is rarely as direct as it appears on the surface. People assume that words carry only one meaning, but in reality, language often operates on two levels at once: what is said and what is meant. Most misunderstandings in relationships don't come from lack of communication, but from misreading the depth behind it. When emotions are involved, especially in close connections, people tend to soften their truth, not because they are dishonest, but because direct expression can feel too exposing. Saying exactly what you feel removes protection. It leaves no space to retreat if the response is not what you hoped for. So instead, meaning is wrapped in something safer, something that looks ordinary on the outside, but carries emotional intent underneath. This is why subtle communication becomes important in emotional dynamics. A simple question, a small remark, or even a change in tone can sometimes hold more meaning than an entire conversation, but only if it is received with awareness. Without that awareness, everything stays at surface level, and the deeper emotional layer goes unnoticed. The challenge is that most people are trained to respond literally. They hear words and answer words. They don't pause to ask what is being felt behind those words. So when someone reaches out indirectly, the response often misses the emotional direction entirely. And in relationships, missed emotional direction creates distance faster than disagreement ever could. What makes this even more complex is that emotional communication is not always conscious. People don't sit and plan hidden meanings into every sentence. Instead, emotions naturally influence how things are said. A moment of closeness might soften language. A moment of uncertainty might make speech more indirect. A desire for connection might show up as curiosity. None of it is scripted, but all of it is meaningful in context. This is why context becomes everything. The same words can mean completely different things depending on timing, tone, and emotional atmosphere. A question asked in passing is not the same as a question asked during a quiet, intimate moment. The difference is not in grammar, it is in energy. And energy is what most people overlook because it cannot be measured as easily as words. When someone is emotionally reaching out, even subtly, they are often looking for more than information. They are looking for resonance. They want to feel that the other person is aligned with their emotional state, even if nothing is said directly about it. That alignment creates a sense of being understood without needing full explanation. But when responses remain purely factual, something important gets lost. The interaction becomes efficient but not meaningful, correct but not connected. And over time, that gap between efficiency and emotional presence begins to shape how close two people actually feel, even if they are still talking regularly. The key insight is not to overanalyze every word, but to recognize when communication carries emotional weight beyond its literal meaning. It is about developing sensitivity to moments where language is doing more than just transferring information. Those moments are where connection is either strengthened or weakened. Because at the core of human interaction, especially in close relationships, people are not just asking questions or making statements. They are testing presence. They are checking whether they are being emotionally met, not just verbally answered. And the difference between those two responses quietly defines how close two people truly become over time. Emotional communication doesn't always arrive in obvious form. It rarely comes with clear instructions or loud signals. More often, it appears in small moments that seem ordinary on the surface but carry subtle emotional weight underneath. And the difference between connection and distance often depends on whether those moments are recognized or overlooked. When people feel something deeply, they don't always express it directly. Instead, they often soften it. They wrap it in casual language, light questions, or everyday conversation. This isn't necessarily intentional manipulation. It is a natural response to vulnerability. Saying something directly can feel too exposed, too final, too risky. So the mind finds indirect ways to reach out while still maintaining emotional safety. This is why some questions feel different, even if they sound the same. The words might be simple, but the timing, tone, and context give them deeper meaning. A question asked in a quiet moment carries more emotional weight than the same question asked in passing. What changes is not the structure of the sentence, but the emotional environment around it. Most people miss this layer because they are trained to respond literally. They hear words and answer words. They focus on content, not context. But emotional communication does not operate purely on content. It operates on intention, timing, and subtle shifts in energy. And when those elements are ignored, the deeper message is lost entirely. Understanding this doesn't mean assuming hidden meanings in everything. It means developing sensitivity to when something feels emotionally significant. There is a difference between overthinking and awareness. Overthinking creates confusion by assigning meaning where there is none. Awareness simply notices when meaning is already present beneath the surface. In close relationships, especially where emotional connection is forming, people often test response before revealing intent, not in a calculated way, but in a natural one. They observe how the other person responds to small openings. Do they engage or dismiss? Do they stay present or drift away? These responses quietly shape how safe the connection feels over time. Because emotional safety is built gradually, it is not created through one perfect conversation, but through repeated moments where someone feels acknowledged rather than ignored. Each time a subtle reach is met with presence, trust deepens slightly. Each time it is missed, distance increases quietly. This is why small interactions matter more than they appear to. A brief question, a simple check-in, or a casual comment can sometimes carry more emotional significance than longer discussions. Not because the words themselves are powerful, but because of what they represent in that moment. Attention, awareness, or lack of it. When someone is emotionally engaged, they are not always looking for answers. Sometimes they are looking for resonance. They want to feel that the other person is attuned to them, not just hearing them, but sensing them. That sense of being emotionally matched creates a form of closeness that words alone cannot achieve. But when responses remain surface level, something shifts. The interaction stays functional, but loses depth. Conversations continue, but emotional momentum slows. And over time, that gap between talking and truly connecting becomes more noticeable. The key insight is that emotional communication is rarely about decoding hidden messages. It is about recognizing when a moment carries more meaning than its surface suggests. And responding in a way that acknowledges that depth, even quietly, even simply, can change the entire direction of connection without needing anything dramatic or forced. Emotional disconnection rarely happens in a single moment. It doesn't usually come from one argument, one mistake, or one clear turning point. Instead, it develops slowly, through repeated small experiences where emotional signals are either acknowledged or missed. And over time, those small moments begin to shape how safe, understood, and valued someone feels in a connection. In any interaction where emotion is present, People are constantly sending subtle signals, not always through words, but through tone, timing, pauses, and small changes in behavior. These signals are not always conscious, but they are real. A slight hesitation before speaking, a softer tone in a quiet moment, or a small question asked at the right time can all carry emotional weight that goes beyond literal meaning. The problem is that most of these signals are not dramatic enough to demand attention. They don't interrupt the flow of conversation. They don't announce themselves. They blend into ordinary interaction, and because of that, they are often missed entirely. But what feels small in the moment can still be emotionally significant in context. When someone reaches out emotionally in a subtle way, they are not always seeking information. Often they are seeking connection. They are testing whether the other person is mentally and emotionally present with them, not distracted, not half engaged, fully there, and the response they receive in that moment quietly shapes their perception of closeness. If those moments are met with awareness, even simple awareness, the connection strengthens. The person feels seen, even in a small way. That feeling builds trust. It creates emotional safety, and safety is what allows deeper openness to develop naturally over time. But when those moments are consistently missed, something changes. Not immediately, and not in an obvious way. There is no sudden shift. Instead, there is a gradual reduction in emotional reach. The person begins to express less, test less, and share less. Not because the connection is gone, but because the emotional feedback they were seeking is not being received. This creates a silent cycle. One person reaches out subtly, the other responds without noticing the emotional layer. The first person adjusts, lowers expectations, and slowly withdraws emotionally. And by the time both people realize something feels different, the distance has already formed. What makes this dynamic powerful is that it often happens without conflict. There is no fight, no breakup moment, no clear explanation, just a quiet fading of emotional intensity. Conversations still happen, but they feel lighter, less charged, less connected. At the core of this process is attention. Not attention in the sense of focus alone, but emotional attention, the ability to notice when something carries more meaning than its surface suggests. This does not mean over-interpreting everything. It means recognizing when a moment feels slightly different, slightly more personal, slightly more vulnerable than usual. Because emotional communication is rarely about what is said directly. It is about what is being attempted underneath the words. A question might not just be a question. A pause might not just be silence. A casual remark might carry an emotional test hidden inside it. And whether that is met or missed determines how connection evolves. Over time, relationships are shaped less by big events and more by these small responses. Each moment of awareness builds trust. Each moment of inattention slowly weakens it, not dramatically, but steadily. And that is why emotional presence matters more than perfect communication. Because people don't just remember what was said to them. They remember whether in the moments that mattered quietly they felt understood or overlooked. People often assume that connection is built through the right words, carefully chosen responses, and perfectly timed expressions. But in reality, connection is far more sensitive than that. It doesn't rely on perfection, it relies on presence. And presence is something you either bring into a moment or you don't. When two people interact, especially in emotionally charged or developing relationships, there is always something happening beneath the conversation. Not visible, not obvious, but present. A kind of emotional undercurrent that shapes how each word is received. One person may be speaking casually, but internally there may be curiosity, uncertainty, or a quiet need for reassurance. And that inner state often influences how they communicate, even if they never explicitly say it. The mistake most people make is thinking communication is only about content, about what was said. But emotional communication works differently. It is shaped just as much by energy, timing, and attention as it is by words. A sentence spoken with full presence lands differently than the same sentence spoken while distracted or disconnected. The meaning may stay the same on paper, but the emotional impact changes completely. This is where many connections weaken without anyone realizing it. Not through conflict, but through absence. Not physical absence, but emotional absence. Being there without fully being there. Responding without truly engaging. Listening without actually receiving what is being expressed beyond words. Presence in its truest form is not just attention, it is alignment. It is being mentally and emotionally in the same space as the other person. It means you are not preparing your next response while they are speaking. You are not half elsewhere, half here. You are fully in the moment, allowing the interaction to unfold naturally, instead of forcing it into structure. When presence is missing, even simple interactions begin to feel slightly off, not wrong enough to point out, but different enough to feel. The conversation continues, but something in it loses depth. The emotional rhythm becomes inconsistent. One person reaches, the other responds mechanically. Over time, this creates a quiet emotional gap that grows without resistance. On the other hand, when presence is consistent, something very different happens. Even ordinary conversations begin to feel meaningful, not because the topics are special, but because the attention is real. The other person feels it. They may not consciously analyze it, but they sense when they are being fully met in a moment versus when they are just being replied to. This is why emotional impact is rarely about what is said. It is about how it is received. A simple response given with genuine attention can carry more weight than a carefully crafted sentence delivered without presence. Because people don't only hear words, they feel whether they are being engaged with or just managed. Over time, this difference becomes defining, not in dramatic ways, but in subtle ones. The sense of closeness, ease, and comfort in a connection is built through repeated experiences of being fully met. And equally, emotional distance is built through repeated experiences of being partially ignored. What makes this powerful is that it doesn't require perfect communication skills. It requires awareness, the ability to notice when you are truly present and when you are not. The willingness to slow down internally, even if the conversation is simple externally. Because in the end, connection is not created through effort alone. It is created through attention that feels real. And when that attention is consistent, even silence becomes meaningful, because presence itself becomes the message.